we're going to continue working on rational numbers and number lines. This time we're going to identify rational numbers on a number line. So you already have a point somewhere, you have to figure out what it is. Evidence-wise, we're going to figure out how do we even read a number line, and then we'll move into identifying rational numbers. Learning experience-wise, we've got 2 examples, and then you'll have a few problems to try on your own. Example 1, we want to find the value of point A. Before we do that, let's just make sure that we know how our number line is organized. So first off, first thing you always want to do whenever you're looking at a number line is see if the origin is somewhere present. The origin is just where 0 is, and then we can also do that with the rest of our whole numbers as well. We're just going to highlight where they are so we can kind of see what's going on. After we do so, we're going to look at the lines in between. So for example, between 0 and 1, we have 1, 2, 3 lines. If we think of this as a box, which you may have seen in the 2.2.1 video, you may have seen this idea. And what this is showing us is that if this is one whole this distance, each of these lines is representing a fourth, 1/4. So we have 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, and then technically 1 would be 4/4 rather. But remember that that's the same thing as one whole. We can do the same thing in the negative direction. This would be something like 1/4, but negative, -2/4, -3/4, and then we get down here to -1. So the scale might be different depending on what kind of a number line you're looking at. Sometimes it's not going to be broken up into fourths, and other times it's going to be exactly like this. Sometimes you won't even have lines in between. It just depends on what kind of a number line you have. But this is the basic idea. Additionally, remember that some number lines are vertical, like this one. Some of them are going to be horizontal. Doesn't matter. Same ideas apply. Remember that this is the negative end, this is the positive end. So, going back to what we're actually trying to do, we're trying to find the value of point A. So we're going to figure out where is point A. Well, it's right here. And we know that it's going to be less than 1, but greater than 0. It's somewhere in between these two values. Now, luckily, we've already broken down the scale here. And all we really need to do to figure it out is count how many spaces we need to go to get to A. We're going to start at 0, and we're going to go 1, 2, 3. So we could write down a 3. That's not going to be our solution, though, because we already know that A is between 1 and 0. And if we look at our fractions here, we've gone 1, 2, 3 out of our 4 boxes. So that actually means that the value of A is going to be 3/4. Again, your fraction might be different depending on what kind of a scale you have. In these 2 examples, and even your suggested practice problems, the scale is just going to be something out of 4. It's going to be going up by 1/4 each line. Now let's do the same thing, but for point D. This time, D is down here, which means it's going to be a negative number because it's between -1 and -2. Now, you might be very tempted to say, well, let's just make a box, as we do, and use this same strategy that we just used. And technically you can, but the problem is, if you do that, then you end up with 5. Out of what? Well, 5. But 5/5 is just 1. And we can see that -1 is over here. So even if we made this negative and this negative, it's still not going to match up with where D actually is. Now we can use something similar to this, which we'll talk about in a sec, but that's not going to quite work the same way. Instead, what we can do is we can say, well, it has to be at least -1. So we can just write down a -1 to start with. And then we can just go from here. If we look at the distance between -1 and -2, we can again break that distance into fourths. And that means that we'll just have 1/4. Now, of course, these are negatives, so we need to bear that in mind. But we could just say that's -1 and 1/4. We've gone a whole 1 plus an extra little bit. So that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is actually using what we drew earlier. We can still draw our box like this. And as long as we remember that these are representing fourths, we can still do that. So we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fourths. And that would still be an acceptable answer, as long as we make sure that's still negative. Additionally, you don't have to use fractions if you don't want to. If you prefer to think with decimals, you can absolutely use decimals. In this case, it would be -1.25, negative 1 and 25 hundredths. So, a couple of different ways you could do that, depending on what you prefer. As for suggested practice problems, you are just going to do the other 3 values that we did not find, B, H, and F. You can use the same ideas that we used. You might want to write out this number line yourself on a piece of paper so you can do it a little bit more easily, and that should be good to go. Good luck.